The night of January 13th, 1969, started like any other, but little did I know it would be the beginning of something legendary. I was Elvis Presley, and I was about to walk into a studio that would change my life and music forever. It was a Monday, and the world outside was cold and dark. But inside 827 Thomas Street, the American Sound Studio, it was a different story. The place was a dump, with rats chirping in the rafters and the neighborhood looking like it had seen better days. But the moment I stepped in, I felt a vibe that was electric. The room seemed to vibrate with soulfulness, and I knew I was in the right place. Chips Moman, the studio's godfather, was waiting for me with a stern look. He was a man who demanded nothing less than perfection. He could be patient, but he was also a taskmaster. The musicians, all Southerners around my age, were already in their groove. They had a style that blended country, gospel, and rhythm and blues, and it was unlike anything I had heard before. Tommy Cogbill, the bass player, had a way of making his bass lines sound like hooks. Reggie Young on guitar played with a subtlety that brought out the best in every song. Bobby Wood on piano, Bobby Emmons on organ, and Gene Chrisman on drums completed the band. They were a tight unit, and I could feel the chemistry the moment I joined them. I walked in with a sense of purpose. I had a list of songs I wanted to record, from old favorites like From a Jack to a King, to new ones like Long Black Limousine. The latter was a haunting ballad about a country girl's tragic journey to stardom. The moment I started singing it, I felt a deep connection. The band played with a simplicity that allowed me to explore the song's emotional depth. The studio's 8-track board gave us the flexibility to record the rhythm, and then overdub the vocals, horns, and other elements. It was a new approach for me, but it worked. We recorded Long Black Limousine first, and it was intense. The song's story came to life, and I poured every ounce of emotion into my voice. The band left spaces for me to fill, and the overdubs added layers that made the song even more powerful. It was a performance that felt raw and real, and I knew it was something special. The next song, This Is the Story, was a slow ballad with a rough, almost hoarse tone to my voice. It was a sign that I was coming down with a cold, but I pushed through. The band's fluid bass lines and the later overdubs added strings and a female vocal that blended perfectly with mine, giving the song a richness that I hadn't heard in years. As the night wore on, we kept going. We tried out, Come Out, but it didn't quite hit the mark. Then we moved on to Wearing That Loved On Look, a funky, soulful song that suited me well. I was relaxed and energetic, altering the lyrics and even throwing in a line from A Little Less Conversation. The band and I worked through a series of takes, and by take 10, we had something solid. But the rhythm track was still a mess, and my voice was starting to wear out. Chips and I agreed to keep the best parts and fix the rest later. At 3 in the morning, I was back at the microphone, ready for more. We started with You'll Think of Me, and the Electric Sitter intro by Reggie Young set the tone. The song was a potential hit, and we all felt it. We recorded more than 20 takes, and Chips knew he had to redo my vocal track once my voice recovered. We finished the night with A Little Bit of Green and I'm Moving On, but my voice was nearly gone by the end. The next day, I was grounded with full-blown laryngitis, but the session continued without me. The band laid down tracks for Don't Cry Daddy and Poor Man's Gold, 2 songs by Mac Davis. They were simple and heartfelt, and I knew they would work well. We also recorded Mama Like the Roses, a sentimental tune that I really connected with. When I returned on Monday, I was ready to take my music to the next level. We tackled In the Ghetto, a song that spoke to the social and racial issues of the time. It was a bold move for me, but I felt strongly about the message. I sang it with a clarity and sensitivity that I hadn't shown before. The band was tight, and the drum roll added a sense of urgency. We recorded take after take, and by the 21st take, we had something special. Chips pushed me to overdub a new vocal, and I delivered a performance that was committed and powerful. The night was far from over. We finished with Gentle on My Mind and Rubbernickin', 2 more solid tracks. The session was intense, but it was also a reminder of why I loved making music. The studio, the band, and the songs, all of it, came together to create something that felt like magic. As I left the studio that night, I knew I had something special on my hands. I was standing right there, feeling the weight of the pressure. Everyone was on edge, worried about where things were headed. Felton Jarvis, who had been like a second dad to me, hadn't produced a big hit for me in a while. He'd been there for the TV special and the If I Can Dream single, but he didn't want to be left behind again. If it meant sharing the producer's chair with Chips Moman, or even stepping back to an A&R role, he was okay with it as long as he could still be part of the action. For me, there was a real urgency to nail these sessions. I wanted to prove that I could still deliver the goods. Chips was pushing me hard, and I was pushing myself harder than I had in years. It felt like the early days with Sam Phillips, when every note was a challenge and a chance to prove myself. There was a spirit of experimentation in the air. One Tuesday evening, we decided to try a Beatles song. I only knew a few lines of Hey Jude, and I couldn't finish it without the lyrics, but the vibe was right. We got a few takes, but it felt incomplete. We had other songs that needed fixing, like I'm Moving On and Long Black Limousine, so I switched to doing vocal overdubs. I sang My Little Friend, Inherit the Wind, Mama Like the Roses, and Don't Cry Daddy. But when I started Poor Man's Gold, a fire engine passed by and I couldn't help but laugh. We dropped that and Come Out by RCA. To burn off some energy, I started playing From a Jack to a King on my guitar. It was one of my dad's favorite songs, and he had come by that night. I wasn't planning to record it, but the way I sang it was pure, spontaneous fun. I was having a blast. The next evening, I came in early to meet Roy Hamilton, who was working with producer Tommy Cogbill on an album for Chips's AGP label. I suggested he record Angelica, a song I was planning to do. It was a nice gesture, and it turned out to be the single from Roy's session. Sadly, it was his last. He passed away from a stroke that summer. Feeling inspired by Roy, I dove into Without Love, a gospel-tinged ballad. It was like a burst of energy, and I poured my heart into it. The song had a simple country feel, but with the passion of a soul ballad. I played the piano and lost myself in the emotion. It reminded me of You'll Never Walk Alone from 1967. Then, without a break, I started I'll Hold You in My Heart. I knew the song from Eddie Arnold and the Sons of the Pioneers. It became a 4.5-minute soulful plea, full of emotion. I was just winding down when I started I'll Be There, a lighter, upbeat ballad. It wasn't a serious take, but it was part of the musical world inside my head. The sessions were coming to an end, but Chips still had work to do with the Memphis horns and the girl singers. Around midnight, he encouraged me to try Suspicious Minds, a song that had flopped when Mark James recorded it. Marty Lacker, George Klein, and Joe Esposito all thought it could be a hit. We worked on the arrangement, and I practiced the lyrics, even asking Bobby Wood to sing along to help me get it right. The first take felt good, and I relaxed enough to do some karate exercises between takes. By the time we finished, we knew we had something special. There was a minor issue with publishing rights, but Harry Jenkins, our diplomat, kept things smooth. I even interfered in the business side, saying I wouldn't let a dispute stop me from releasing a song I loved. I gave an early morning interview, clad in white, raving about how good it felt to be back in Memphis and working at American. Chips was there, and we celebrated the success. We've done some hits, haven't we, Chips? I asked. Maybe some of your biggest, he responded modestly. We booked more sessions for February, and Charlie Hodge started organizing the list. Most of the songs were old favorites like Stranger in My Own Hometown, After Loving You, and I Will Be True. There were a few that Freddie Bienstock couldn't clear, but we had Power of My Love, which made it to the February sessions. When we got to the studio in February, I started by serenading Chips with This Time and It's My Way. I laughed at my mistakes, but sang with all my heart. Then we moved on to True Love Travels on a Gravel Road. It was a soul ballad, and we struggled to find the right tempo. Reggie suggested running his guitar through a Leslie amplifier, and after a few takes, we got it right. Next, we did Stranger in My Own Hometown, a blues song. It was a perfect choice, and I dove into it. The band got into the groove, and even the overdubs couldn't dampen the spirit of the song. We ate a lot of chicken that week, and after one meal, Chips brought up, and the grass won't pay no mind. I joked about the cymbal hit, and it took a while to get the right tempo. Chips was tough, stopping take after take, but we finally got it right. By 4 a.m. I was exhausted but still joking. "Listen easy, you can hear," I crooned, then added, "You can hear Chips calling." It was a week of hard work, but it felt like we were on the right track. We were making hits, and it felt good to be back in the studio doing what I loved. I was part of the team behind Elvis, and those days at American studios were like a whirlwind. We followed up our hit Devil in Disguise with a bunch of songs for Elvis's movies, but they weren't as strong. Then Freddie brought us Power of My Love, an older song that Elvis had been talking about for years. This time he really got into it. Elvis sang it with all the soul and passion he could muster. The song was full of clever hints and double meanings, and Elvis made it steamy and powerful. The horns and harmonica added to the intensity, and the girl singers brought it home with their amazing backup vocals. It was the only song Freddie's brought that made it onto the tape, and it might not be a coincidence that Felton, not Chips, was the one encouraging Elvis in the session. The next song, After Loving You, was a surprise pick. Elvis had been practicing this Eddie Arnold hit for years, and was determined to record it. He played the piano in a staccato style, and sang with the same energy he used for One Night. It was a great performance, but it wasn't how Chips liked to work. Chips was all about careful craftsmanship, and he took over for the next song, Do You Know Who I Am? This was a very emotional ballad, and Elvis tried his best to give it a bluesy touch, even though it had a folk country feel. There were a few problems with the vocals, and Elvis's voice was starting to strain, but Chips focused on getting the rhythm right. Once Gene Chrisman switched to brushes and Tommy Cogbill played more subtly, we got the sound we wanted. The next day we worked hard again. Lamar Fike, Elvis's longtime friend, was over the moon. He had 2 of his songs recorded earlier, and another, Memory Revival, was set to be recorded. Lamar convinced Eddie Rabbitt to give up his best new song, Kentucky Rain. When Elvis started working on it at 7:30 that evening, Lamar was thrilled. Chips wanted the song to have a bit more edge, and it took hours to get it right. But everyone agreed it had the potential to be a hit. Chips and Felton worked well together, with Chips giving instructions and Felton providing the support Elvis needed. Only the Strong Survive was next. It was a recent soul hit by Jerry Butler, and it was perfect for updating Elvis's image, but it wasn't easy to match Butler's performance. Elvis was hard on himself, saying things like, "That's one of the worst jobs of singing I have ever heard in my life," but he never gave up. Even Freddie was impressed and raved about it to Bob Dylan when they met on a plane. We went back to some older hits like Johnny Tillotson's It Keeps Right on a Hurtin' and Chuck Jackson's Any Day Now. Felton was comfortable with these, so Chips took a step back. Elvis and Felton were in their element, and the music flowed. By 4:30 the next morning, we were all tired. Elvis and Bobby Wood were sitting on the piano bench, talking about religion and music. Bobby had a hit with Searchin' and had recorded If I'm a Fool for Loving You. Elvis introduced Bobby to his dad, and when Vernon said it was one of his favorites, Elvis decided to give it a try. It wasn't the best, and Elvis called it rotten, but compared to the Hollywood soundtrack songs, it was a big improvement. The next night, we tried 2 new songs, The Fair's Moving On and Memory Revival. Elvis threw himself into The Fair's Moving On, but didn't do a vocal track for Memory Revival. On the 22nd, we did some repairs and recorded Who Am I?, a religious song Bobby had recorded. It was a great addition to what had been an amazing session. The soundtrack for Change of Habit was a different story. The film was a commercial misfire, and the songs were not up to the level of what we had done in Memphis. The title song was okay, but Have a Happy was a clear example of what had gone wrong with Elvis's movie soundtracks, but things were looking up. If I Can Dream, from the TV special, reached number 12, which was a big deal. The album from the special also went gold, and Memories was released as a single. The Colonel was making good deals, and the move to American studios had paid off. Chips Moman was crucial in bringing a new sound to Elvis's music, but he refused to give up any share of the publishing on Suspicious Minds. In the Ghetto became the first single, and Chips chose the best songs for the album, including Suspicious Minds, Kentucky Rain, and Don't Cry Daddy. There was tension between Chips and Elvis's management over publishing and production credits. Chips wanted to be listed as the producer and get royalties, but the Colonel wouldn't allow it. Chips got so frustrated that he told them to consider the whole thing a demo session and not to come back to American studios. But the album, From Elvis in Memphis, was a huge success. It showed Elvis in a new light, and the reviews were amazing. The Colonel saw the success and knew it was time for Elvis to get back on stage. A deal was made for Elvis to perform at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, with 2 shows every night for 4 weeks. It was a big step, and the stage was set for Elvis's comeback. I remember it like it was yesterday, the summer of 1969, and I was about to step back into the spotlight after a long break. Las Vegas, the city of lights, the city where the Rat Pack ruled. I had a lot to prove and a lot to gain. My manager, the Colonel, and I had been planning this for a while. It wasn't just about making money. It was about making a statement. I was 34, and I wanted to show everyone that I still had what it took to be the king of rock and roll. Las Vegas was a different world from the Bible Belt, where I grew up. It was all about glitz and glamour, and the audiences were a mix of people looking for a good time and some nostalgia. The Colonel and I knew that I needed a guaranteed audience and a steady income. We also knew that my old fan base had grown up. They were now young adults and newlyweds, just like me. They were the kind of people who would travel to Vegas for a vacation and a chance to see their old idol perform. I started preparing for the shows by putting together a new band. Some of my old friends, like Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, couldn't make it because they had other commitments. I was disappointed, but I knew I had to move forward. I reached out to James Burton, a legendary guitarist who had played with Ricky Nelson and even Frank Sinatra. He brought in Jerry Sheff on bass and Ronnie Tutt on drums. My old friend Charlie Hodge would be by my side, singing harmony and helping me with the show. We also hired 2 amazing vocal groups, the Imperials and the Sweet Inspirations. The Imperials had worked with me before, and the Sweet Inspirations were known for their soulful gospel sound. Charlie and I spent a lot of time figuring out the set list. We knew we had to mix old hits with new material. We tried out a lot of songs, from Beatles covers like Slow Down and Yesterday, to country classics like Green, Green Grass of Home. We even considered some rockabilly numbers, but in the end, we focused on the songs that really resonated with us. In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds became 2 of the highlights of the show. We rehearsed hard, making sure the band and the vocal groups were in sync. We opened with Blue Suede Shoes to get the crowd pumped up. I wanted to show that I could still deliver the energy and passion that made me famous in the first place. The big band sound added a touch of sophistication, but I made sure to keep it raw and real. I wanted the audience to feel the emotion in every note. The show was a mix of rock, soul, and gospel. I used the Sweet Inspirations to add soulfulness to songs like I Can't Stop Loving You. I also brought in a touch of the Nashville sound with words and a powerful performance of Are You Lonesome Tonight, with Millie Kirkham's haunting countervocal. We closed the show with Can't Help Falling in Love, a perfect way to end on a high note. The Colonel and RCA set up a mobile recording unit to capture the shows. We recorded every performance, and the results were amazing. The energy in the room was electric, and the audience was eating it up. I remember the sweat, the adrenaline, and the feeling of being back where I belonged. The reviews were fantastic. Rolling Stone called it supernatural, and I was glad to see that people still cared. I even got to tell some stories about my life, like my time in the army and my movies. I tried to be honest and self-deprecating, but the Colonel reminded me to watch what I said. There were families in the audience after all. The shows were a sellout, and the Colonel negotiated a 5-year deal with the International Hotel. I was back, and I was better than ever. Las Vegas became my second home, and I knew that I had found a new audience and a new purpose. It was a new beginning, and I was ready to take on the world. I was just hitting my stride again, and the Colonel was eager to capitalize on it. After In the Ghetto made it to the top 3, I tried to follow it up with Clean Up Your Own Backyard, a song from the movie The Trouble with Girls. I thought adding some new touches would make it a hit, but it only got to number 35. People seemed to prefer the old Elvis sound, but I wasn't worried. Suspicious Minds was the standout from the Memphis sessions, and it was a hit in Las Vegas. When it was released as a single, it started at number 77, but quickly shot up the charts. After 8 weeks, it hit number 1, and it sold over 1 million copies. That was a big deal for me, and RCA was ready to capitalize on the momentum. In November, they released a double album, From Memphis to Vegas, From Vegas to Memphis. It was a mix of live and studio tracks. The live part was from my August shows, and the studio part was from the Memphis sessions. The album included Don't Cry Daddy and Kentucky Rain, both of which did well. The live version of Suspicious Minds was a standout, and it showed how powerful my live performances could be. By the end of 1969, I had my best year since the early 60s. The Colonel was itching to break new ground, and he booked me back in Las Vegas for January 1970. This time he picked the deadest season of the year, but he was confident I could still draw a crowd, and he was right. Opening night was sold out, and the entire 4-week run was packed. The International Hotel was a fancy place, with shops, restaurants, and a casino. The theater had a golden curtain and chandeliers, and it was a far cry from the old country shows I used to do. The show was a mix of my old hits and new material. I opened with All Shook Up, and I tried to keep the performance tight and focused. The hotel wanted me to keep it short, so people could get back to the casino. I included In the Ghetto, Suspicious Minds, Don't Cry Daddy, and Kentucky Rain, and I threw in some old favorites like Hound Dog and Love Me Tender. One of the highlights was Polk Salad Annie, a song by Tony Joe White. The audience loved it, and I even did some karate moves to get them hyped up. RCA took advantage of the shows to record a new live album. They brought in 16-track recording equipment, and Felton Jarvis and Al Pachuki were in charge. The first night, I was a bit under the weather, but we still got some good tracks. We recorded The Wonder of You, Release Me, and CC Rider. We even used some of the old '69 concert tapes to fill out the album, including Runaway, and the Yesterday, and Hey Jude medley. After the Vegas run, I flew to Houston to meet the Colonel. He had set up a command center for my appearance at the Houston Livestock Show. I did a press conference and talked about my musical background. When asked if I considered myself a country singer, I said I liked all types of music, including country, gospel, and rhythm and blues. It was a mix of all those influences that made me who I was. The Houston shows were a challenge. The Astrodome was huge, and the sound was terrible. But I reassured my band that we should just play and not fight it. The Colonel had flown in engineers to try and fix the sound, but it was a tough venue. Despite the sound issues, the shows were a huge success. Over 250,000 people attended, and one show had a record audience of 43,614. The Colonel was thrilled, and I made a lot of money from it. The Colonel was always thinking ahead, and he closed a deal with MGM to film my next Las Vegas engagement. He wanted to show the whole process, from rehearsals to the shows. It was another way to keep me in the spotlight and break new ground. I remember the summer of 1970 like it was yesterday. It was a time of change, and I was ready to embrace it. Felton Jarvis, my trusted producer, had just left RCA to work with me exclusively. I was excited to have him by my side, and he was eager to get started on a new batch of recordings. We planned to cut 18 sides, enough for one album and 2 singles, that I was required to deliver in 1970. On the night of June 4th, 1970, we walked into RCA Studio B in Nashville. It had been 2.5 years since I last recorded there. The studio felt different, but in a good way. I was ready to make some magic. Felton and I had a new band, and they were top-notch. James Burton on guitar, David Briggs on piano, Norbert Putnam on bass, Chip Young on rhythm guitar, Charlie McCoy on harmonica and organ, and Jerry Kerrigan on drum. These guys were the best in Nashville, and they were all ready to rock. We started with a few warm-up songs like Mystery Train and Tiger Man to get everyone in the groove. Then it was time to get serious. The first song we tackled was 20 Days and 20 Nights, a powerful ballad by Ben Weissman and Clive Westlake. It was a bit tricky at first, but we got it right after a few takes. Next we did I've Lost You, a heart-wrenching song by Ken Howard and Alan Blakely. The lyrics were intense and I had to focus hard, but it turned out great. To lighten the mood, we did a quick take of I Was Born About 10,000 Years Ago, an old country gospel standard. It was a blast to sing, and it helped us all relax. After a short break, we recorded The Sound of Your Cry, another ballad from the Carlin catalog. By midnight, we had 4 songs in the bag, and everyone was feeling good. The sound in Nashville was different from what we did in Memphis. The studio had a new 16-track machine, which gave us more control over the final mix. We could add effects and overdubs later, which was a huge plus. It was a new way of working, and I liked it. The next night, we started with Bridge Over Troubled Water, a cover of Paul Simon's hit. I loved the song, and it felt right to do it my way. We also did Got My Mojo Working, a blues classic that was a lot of fun to sing. How the Web Was Woven and Stranger in the Crowd were both strong ballads, and I poured my heart into them. Mary in the Morning was a sweet, melodic song that fit my style well. On the third night, we recorded I Didn't Make It on Playing Guitar, a jam that was more about having fun than making a hit. It Ain't No Big Thing But It's Growing, and You Don't Have to Say You Love Me were both solid tracks. Just Pretend and This Is Our Dance were more ballads, and I was getting really into the flow by then. Life and Heart of Rome were both meaningful songs that I felt connected to. The fourth night, we did When I'm Over You, a deep emotional song that required a lot of concentration. I Really Don't Want to Know was a country-style ballad that I really enjoyed. We also recorded Faded Love, Tomorrow Never Comes, The Next Step is Love, Make the World Go Away, and Funny How Time Slips Away. Each song had its own story, and I tried to bring out the emotion in everyone. On the final night, we finished with There Goes My Everything, If I Were You, Only Believe, Sylvia, and Patch It Up. By the time we were done, we had a collection of songs that I was proud of. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it. Felton and the band were amazing, and I couldn't have done it without them. Looking back, those sessions in June 1970 were a turning point for me. I was back in Nashville with a new team and ready to make some of the best music of my career. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. Elvis and I were back in Nashville, and it felt like we were hitting our stride. We had the Muscle Shoals rhythm section, which was like a dream team for country hits. They could play anything, just like the American group, but there were some differences. The Muscle Shoals guys had a bit more of a country feel, and their bass and drums were a bit more straightforward. The Memphis band, on the other hand, had a more soulful, layered sound, thanks to the genius of Tommy Cogbill and the dueling keyboards. But what made both groups perfect for Elvis was their ability to play exactly what he heard in his head, no matter the genre. One night, Elvis was in a playful mood. He started with a song from his childhood, Faded Love by Bob Wills. But when we couldn't find the lyrics, he suggested we do The Fool instead. Chip Young and James Burton jumped right in with the Delta Blues guitar riff, and the rest of us followed. We nailed it in just 2 takes. Then Elvis grabbed an acoustic guitar and started playing bluegrass tunes like 100 Years From Now and Little Cabin on the Hill. It was a free-for-all, but it was also some of the best music we made that night. The next day, Elvis was ready to tackle some new material. He started with Paul Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water. David Briggs, the young pianist, led the way, and Elvis sang it with such power and emotion. It was like he was telling his own story. We did a few more ballads, and Elvis was in his element, but he couldn't resist the urge to jam. During a rehearsal for It's Your Baby, You Rock It, we suddenly started playing Got My Mojo Working. Elvis was having a blast, and we all knew we had something special. He even threw in Keep Your Hands Off of It, another old song he remembered from his youth. It was like he was reliving his musical journey right there in the studio. On the third night, Elvis surprised us by playing It Ain't No Big Thing. It was a country hit from the mid-60s, and we fell into it easily, but Elvis couldn't stay on track for long. He started playing the acoustic guitar and shouting, I didn't make it on playing guitar. We broke down a few times, but we eventually got it right. Then we moved on to You Don't Have to Say You Love Me. It was a big, dramatic ballad, and Elvis was completely into it. He gave it everything he had, and even when Felton suggested we had a master, Elvis kept going. He wanted it to be perfect. We also did a gospel-inspired song called Just Pretend, and it was powerful and sincere. But as the night went on, the material started to run thin. We struggled with a few songs, and you could hear Elvis's frustration. He was a perfectionist, and he knew when something wasn't working. The fourth night, things started to change. We began to focus on country music. Elvis was inspired, and the band followed his lead. We did I Really Don't Want to Know, and it was like we were back in Memphis. The energy was there, and we were all on the same page. We also did Faded Love again, this time with a rock edge. It was a different take, but it worked. Then we did Tomorrow Never Comes, and Elvis pushed himself to hit those high notes. It was challenging, but he nailed it. We kept going with The Next Step is Love, which was a bit of a departure from country, but it had a great melody. We followed it up with Make the World Go Away, Funny How Time Slips Away, and I Washed My Hands in Muddy Water. Elvis was in the zone, and the band was right there with him. It was like we were all playing for each other, not just for the tape. On the final night, we started with There Goes My Everything. Elvis said it didn't have to be straight country, and he turned it into a modern ballad. We did a few more songs, but the material was getting thin. We all knew it, but we kept pushing. We ended with Patch It Up, a fast-paced rocker that brought the sessions to a fiery close. By the end of those 5 nights, we had 34 songs. Some were country, some were ballads, and some were rock. But they all had one thing in common. Elvis poured his heart and soul into every single one. Felton was thrilled, and so were we. We knew we had something special, and we couldn't wait to share it with the world. After the whirlwind of recording and producing, I stepped back to watch Elvis prepare for the next big step in his career. The rehearsals for the MGM documentary, That's the Way It Is, were intense. We spent long hours at RCA Studios in Hollywood, and then moved to the MGM Studios in Culver City to get everything just right for the cameras. It was a mix of fun and serious work. We ran through over 60 songs, from old favorites to new tunes that added a fresh edge to Elvis's set. Drummer Ronnie Tutt was back with us, and he had to catch up on the new material. Glenn D. Harden, the piano man, crafted new arrangements for some of the classics. We worked hard, but we also had moments of laughter and relaxation. Songs like I Washed My Hands in Muddy Water and Froggy Went A-Courtin' were more for fun, but the real focus was on the songs that would make it to the stage and the film. We rehearsed at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, where Elvis would perform. The pressure was high, especially for Elvis. He was nervous, but he was also determined to give his best. He lost a lot of weight and looked fantastic in his high-collared white suit, fringes swaying as he moved. The shows were magical. RCA recorded every performance, and MGM captured it all on film. Elvis's voice was powerful, and he brought every song to life, from the soulful Bridge Over Troubled Water to the rockabilly All Shook Up. The Vegas shows were a huge success. The crowds were packed, and the energy was electric. After the filming, Elvis added some surprises to his set, like Johnny Cash's I Walk the Line and the gospel Oh Happy Day. He even mentioned that he had 2 new albums coming out that winter, the documentary soundtrack and a country LP. Back in Nashville, we had one more studio session to wrap up the country album. It was September 22nd, and Elvis was supposed to come in the day before, but he didn't show up. When he finally arrived, he seemed out of sorts. Priscilla was with him, and she hinted that there were some issues, possibly related to drugs. Despite the tension, we still managed to record some great tracks, including Snowbird, Where Did They Go, Lord?, Whole Lot of Shackin' Going On, and Rags to Riches. Elvis's comeback was more than just a return to the stage. It was a rebirth. He had faced challenges, but he was back on top, and the future looked brighter than ever. The Vegas shows and the tour that followed proved that Elvis was still the king, and his music continued to touch the hearts of people around the world. It was a time of incredible highs, and I was proud to be a part of it all.